everybody, it's Steve. I'm recording this after I have finished commenting on everybody's first drafts for the YouTube and Ancient Style project. And I have some notes about what I'm going to talk about here underneath. And there's more stuff underneath about the first peer review part, and you should take a look at that stuff when you get a chance. But let me just sort of like try to sum some stuff up in terms of what I thought about the first projects that everybody did. The first thing I want to say is actually not summing something up, and something to keep in mind for this assignment. Now that you've created a Google Doc that has your YouTube style project on it, don't create another one. In other words, from now on, what you're going to do is you're going to use this project as the sort of home base for, or this Google Doc as sort of the home base for your project. So even if you delete everything that you've written, you keep the same document, because what I'm able to do then, and then you'll post the same link as when you hand the assignment in, because then what I'm able to do is actually track the changes that you made and see what kinds of revisions that you've done, and I can go back to previous comments and stuff like that. So don't start all over. Just make changes to the Google Doc that you've successfully shared with me and everybody else. And again, you'll post that link someplace else. I think the second point is that there was a lot of people who did not have a very complete draft. And, that's kind of a problem. The thing is that on the one hand, I don't want to be sort of like, I don't know, Mickey Mouse about it and say, well, if you don't have this many words, then you don't get credit or something like that, because I don't like being that much of a policeman for these things. On the other hand, it's kind of hard to expect people to give you feedback on a paragraph or something like that. So keep that in mind for future projects. You really want to have, for the peer review process, when I say a rough draft, I mean something that's essentially done, that you want to get feedback on, that you're willing to make changes on. Not, I've got this idea, what do you think? Because that's kind of hard for people to respond to. I think the biggest piece of advice that I have generally for this assignment, and really this almost goes for all writing in college generally, is when you write an assignment, when you get something certainly for me, but I think this is also true for most instructors, imagine a reader who is not familiar with the assignment, with the class, or anything else. And what would you have to do to explain things to that reader so that the essay would make sense? Another way of thinking about it is, imagine that we were still working with paper and it wasn't electronic. And imagine your essay, the paper version of it, was left pinned to a bulletin board someplace. Could somebody read it and actually understand what it's about? Or is there too many references to, well, the assignment, or in the reading, or in the commercial, or something like that, that the reader wouldn't get it? Because the reason why I give that advice is because I think that if you keep that reader in mind, then you'll be able to include readers like me, include readers like your peers, and things like that. Because there's really just not enough. A lot of people didn't do enough to summarize the commercial, because you have to assume an audience of readers who wasn't necessarily watching the commercial, and there wasn't enough apparatus to explain the what you were quoting and paraphrasing. I'm not at all a fan of what I call these sort of like gifty quote, the sort of like all of a sudden there's like just a quote and then a page number just kind of dropped in the middle of something. You need to kind of explain this, right? So you need to say, Crowley and Hawley have this to say about personification. Here's a quote, here's an explanation, and then this is how it applies to the commercial I'm analyzing, if that makes sense. So in other words, all that kind of falls into the realm of like being careful with the reader, guiding them through the process, and helping them out, trying to like understand where they're coming from and what they don't know. That takes more effort, it takes more time. That's part of what makes writing interesting. That's part of what makes writing difficult, is how do you create a text that doesn't need you to communicate, but that it can stand by itself. It's important for this assignment that you effectively quote and paraphrase from the Crowley and Hawley chapter that we read on style. That is, as a teacher, that's a lot of what I'm looking for, is the extent to which that you've mastered the reading, the extent to which you understand the concepts there, and you're able to apply those concepts to analyzing something, in this case a YouTube video. If you didn't read the assignment very carefully to begin with, in terms of the assigned reading, you might need to go back and read it again, because there's a pretty good chance that there's some stuff that you didn't include in your essay that you could include in your essay towards the analysis of your YouTube commercial. So make sure that you actually go back and look at that. So I gave peer review comments for everybody's drafts, and then I also filled the survey for everybody, and I have a link to that there. Go check out that link for that survey. In the column that, when you open that up, it's a Google spreadsheet. The column that's green is your name. So you want to find your name, and then if you look to the left of your name, you'll see the person who reviewed you. And if you look down the right, you'll see the answers to the questions on the columns. I think it's useful to compare the answers, because the thing is, it gives you kind of a place to sort of ballpark, see, it's like, well, who's giving me 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, these different things, and also to compare the final answers, right? Now, what you do with the peer review information is really kind of up to you. You need to revise this stuff by February 8th. That's when the assignment is due at the end of the day. The tricky thing about dealing with peer review is you as a writer have to decide what it is that you want to keep and what it is that you want to set aside. If your peers, and there's 3 peers and myself giving you comments, and a lot of times my comments are like, I agree with these people. If 3 out of 4 of your peers say, this paragraph doesn't make sense, or I think that you need more explanation of the Crowley and Haughey, or I think you need a summary of the commercial, or whatever the issue may be, there's a pretty good chance that that's what you need to do. And I think that you should be responsive to that, because that's the whole point of peer review, is getting that kind of feedback. Ultimately, though, it's your piece. I mean, you're making writing decisions that we can talk about in terms of a grade and stuff like that. But I mean, you're making decisions as a writer, and you have to decide what advice you're going to take and what advice you're not going to take. The other thing I'll mention is that this is due February 8th, but there's the last assignment for the term is actually going to involve revision of one of the first 3. So this is an essay that you may end up returning to before it's all said and done. About peer review generally, what I did is I read through people's blog posts responding to the first peer review process, and I just highlighted some quotes that I had found from some of the people, some folks, some of your responses to the peer review process. And I thought I would just, share those with you. The basic gist is that there seemed to be some responses that were along the lines of, I don't want to hurt people's feelings and things like that. I guess my personal take on this is that I think that you need to be more, I think it's better to be more direct with your classmates about things that they should change. And that when people are offering you advice, they're trying to help make your essay better, and you shouldn't be too sensitive about that. I know that both of those things can be challenging, it's especially challenging in an online environment where one of the things about this space is when you're working just with text is that sometimes it's easier to offend people. It's kind of like it's easier to offend someone with an email because people don't necessarily hear the tone in the email and things like that. And it's the same here with these sort of written comments too. But let's just all work from the assumption that we're here to help each other. We're here trying to make each other's essays better. And to do that, we all should be willing to do, the work that it takes to get beyond just the grammar stuff and the sort of, period here and a comma there and things like that kind of stuff. One other thing I will mention that I think is important is that you do all need to follow MLA style. And we're not going to talk much about what that means because, it's a 300 level writing class. So I kind of work from the assumption that you know what that means. I am going to include a link to a pretty handy resource for this underneath here, which is many of you probably heard of this, which is the Purdue Online Writing Lab, which has all kinds of different searchable advice on MLA style. And essentially what you need for our purposes, if you don't do it perfect, that's fine. You just have to do it well enough that it's recognizable that you're following those kinds of rules. One last thing, and I really want to emphasize this. If you have any questions or concerns about my comments on any of your essays and your peers' comments on your essays, and you want to get together and talk about that, by all means, let's do that. We can meet in person. We can meet via Skype. We can meet via Google Hangout. There's lots of different ways that we can sort of interact with each other about this. But what I don't want you to do is, I don't know, feel like you're not getting the sort of feedback that you need from me to help you with your writing projects, or feel like you're not understanding what I'm trying to like do to help you with this. So don't do that, right? So if you want help, you should ask. But in the meantime, read through more about what I have below, and start thinking about the next unit and think about revising and all that kind of stuff. All right, I think that's enough. Okay, see you online.